Johann Sebastian Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach lived from 1685 through 1750, so his entire adult career was conducted during the 18th century. By the way, we'll encounter another composer in this course who was born in the same year as Bach. Although you might have guessed that his name is German, and in fact the double N at the end of his first name is something that is peculiar to German grammar, and the final sound in his surname, as in Bach, give you an idea that he is from the German-speaking part of Europe, we need to be a little bit more specific about his place of origin. Germany, as we know it, did not exist as a country until 1871. If you looked at a map of Europe before that time, in the place of what is now modern-day Germany, you would find a couple hundred tiny countries, each ruled by its own king or queen, prince or princess, duke or duchess. So the best way to refer to the place of origin for composers from that part of Europe is simply to say that they were born in a German principality. And in fact, Bach was born in one of those many tiny countries that made up what is now modern-day Germany. Bach was one of the most famous organists in Western history, and we know that he was famous during his time because after his death over 90 obituaries were written about him, and in fact in each one of these obituaries his prowess as an organist is noted. So when you think of this composer, Johann Sebastian Bach, think of his major instrument, the organ. Bach, the organist. During his long career, Bach held one of two types of positions. He held a number of jobs as a court musician, and in most of them he served in the capacity of a music director. Basically, it was an administrative job, and he was also expected to write music for the musical establishment of the courts for which he worked. He also held a number of positions as a church musician, and when he did jobs of this sort, he worked as an organist and a choir director for these institutions. Although almost every person in the Western world would recognize Bach, or at least his name, as a composer, it's interesting to note that Bach was not famous as a composer during his lifetime. In fact, his music was terribly old-fashioned. It was decades out of step with the styles of the time, and so it was not esteemed by people outside the jobs that he held. He was fortunate that there were a number of churches and princes with conservative musical taste, so he never lacked for a job. His compositions, however, were not known or widely esteemed outside the positions in which he worked. He was famous, however, as a contrapuntist. A contrapuntist is someone who writes counterpoint. Counterpoint has been one of the staples of music education ever since the Middle Ages and the invention of polyphony. And counterpoint is none other than the art of creating and combining melodies. Every well-educated musician can create melodies and combine them without ever having heard them. It's basically the same thing as you're writing an essay. You know how the words sound, you can combine them into sentences, you can combine the sentences into paragraphs, etc. Musicians learn to do this sort of a thing, and Bach wrote quite a bit of music of this sort because he was interested in teaching others. In fact, we're going to see that certain of his compositions were written specifically for the instruction of others. Bach knew very well that his music was terribly old-fashioned, out of step with the styles of the time, and so when he presented these compositions to the world, he called them exercises.